Hey guys, Harry here. And today I wanted to talk about the difference between brain training and emotional processing when it comes to recovering from conditions like long COVID, ME/CFS, chronic pain, and all of those kind of nervous system dysregulation. So, I get a lot of questions about brain training versus emotional processing. What's the difference? Is there any difference? And today I'm going to break down a little bit about brain training, what the kind of premise is, what the kind of thesis is, and then also emotional processing and how I implement that as well. So, to start with, when it comes to brain training, I'm sure if you're watching this, you've probably been exposed to brain training. Maybe you've been through some of the programs like DNRS, Gupta, whatever. And you've probably been told that the thesis behind what they're trying to teach is this unconscious loop. So, initially we would have had this kind of primed system which we talk about a lot, so a system that is probably very stressed, and it is very, very common across all people with these kind of conditions. You're probably like a workaholic. Um you probably were loving doing loads of things, lots of sport, lots of different activities. You're probably very, very driven, and your system was probably then a little bit fried. I know for me, for example, I was big on sport. I would train judo multiple times a day, but I also love to party. I also love to go out. I love to do all of these things, very much burning the candle at both ends. And so, as the kind of brain training suggests, your system is very much primed to for a trigger to tip it haywire. So it's already very hypersensitive, already in a kind of situation where it is very vulnerable. And then along comes a trigger. Now, this could be a viral infection, a bacterial infection, maybe a crash, maybe a stressful event, maybe some kind of trauma that comes along and meets your system at a very vulnerable time. And because your system is already hypersensitive, it's already in a very delicate space, what happens is it then becomes hyper conditioned, hyper interoceptive, and is very, very sensitive to whatever is going on. And so, this kind of unconscious loop that a lot of these programs talk about get triggered and sets you off in a kind of perpetual cycle of stress. Now, what it states as now happens is you have a kind of very hypersensitive system. And then any kind of external stressor that comes in will trigger that system, will trigger the amygdala that controls the nervous system, that controls the immune system, causing symptoms, which in turn creates more stress in your nervous system. Now, the kind of premise that a lot of these programs talk about is this sort of unconscious loop. So they obviously say that, this is not obviously in your head. This is an unconscious thought loop. This is a mechanism that's happening behind the scenes. And how we're going to go about fixing and solving this is by becoming consciously aware of when this loop is in place and retraining and rewiring it down the neural circuits. Now, obviously, neuroplasticity is very much a thing, and it can have some very profound benefits. And when I first started doing brain training, I got so much benefit from just being aware of symptoms, noticing when I was spiraling, as we often say, and becoming aware and seeing a little bit of what my kind of brain and body was doing. But the whole thought process around the brain training technique is you first stop. So you have a kind of interrupter when you notice what is going on. You notice that you're spiraling. You notice the oh shit, there's that brain fog again. You then stop, very physically you stop, maybe have a little sheet that you put down on the floor and do whatever. You interrupt and notice, so you become aware of it. And then you kind of rewire. So you do like a visualization or something positive, something along those kind of lines. And again, a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of this. I was one included. However, I also kind of thought there was something deeper going on. Everything I experienced was so deeply and profoundly physical, so physiological. The deep pain in my head, the deep pressure, and even though obviously the unconscious loop keeping the nervous system firing did kind of make sense, it felt like there was something sort of trapped and something physiologically wrong and incorrect. And the problem with a lot of brain training, certainly in my case that I found, is that often when we're doing this kind of stop, stop, stop and distracting, is we end up repressing further and we end up kind of pushing away and becoming more and more fearful of the very symptoms that are trying to surface. And I think this is a slightly different framing in how we understand what is going on with brain training versus emotional processing. So in brain training, we kind of see this as a faulty circuit that is misfiring and just needs kind of neural recorrection to change how the brain and the subconscious functions, and then that in turn will settle things down, and your nervous system will resolve. However, when it comes to a more emotional processing approach, we see these symptoms, these intrusive thoughts, these things that are popping up as incompleted survival responses that are surfacing and trying to surface and trying to execute and trying to process. And so, if we do the brain training technique and don't allow them to fully execute, all we are doing is redirecting and distracting. And it might make us feel better in the short term. I know a lot of people experience that. I did as well. But then maybe that symptom will reappear at a later time. Maybe it will reappear in a different place. Maybe you have got benefit, but it hasn't fully resolved that kind of underlying stuckness that you still feel there. And I know that was very much the case with me. So when it comes to the kind of emotional processing, instead of seeing this as a faulty circuit that's gone wrong that needs to be rewired, we see this kind of response as stuck survival energy. So when I say energy, I because of how this word has been, taken over by sort of woo-woo stuff. Whenever I say energy, I'm like, I promise I'm not talking about like crystals or anything like this. I'm just talking about physiological survival energy. That feeling when you're angry, when you're into fight or flight, and you feel that surge bubbling up. That is that visceral, physical survival energy. So what happens when we are in a regular state? We will be drifting between kind of sympathetic arousal and then ventral vagal arousal, which is the kind of safe rest and digest, if you will. And as we go about life, we go up and down in between these two, and that is perfectly normal. Like if you're out and about and you get annoyed by someone, your partner winds you up. Obviously, you're going to tip more into that sympathetic arousal, and you're going to have that kind of fight or flight response, which is very necessary. Now, the difference is with a lot of people with kind of these kind of conditions is instead of going up into this sympathetic response and back down into this ventral, more safe and secure vagal, what will happen is we won't fully feel and won't fully process what has happened. Maybe you kind of repress things. Maybe you like to distract things. Maybe you just love to push yourself as hard as possible so you don't have to feel that stuff underneath, even if that's subconscious. And what will happen is you will be tipped into this sympathetic vagal, and then you will kind of come down a little bit, but won't fully process and fully execute that survival response. So you're still tipped slightly into the sympathetic overdrive. And so this goes on and on and on, and you go further and further up in towards this more sympathetic dominant state. Now, maybe you even tip towards a point like I did after a silent meditation retreat where you go all the way up to this kind of dorsal or shutdown state. But this just demonstrates how with certain individuals, an inability to process, to fully feel, pushes your system more and more into the sympathetic state. And again, as the kind of brain training suggests, along comes a trigger, which really heightens your interoception, so your body's kind of internal observation of its internal state. And everything, any symptom, any sensation becomes hyper aware and really heightened. And so your body keeps trying to bring this unprocessed energy survival mechanism that was unable to complete all those times before. And you might be asking, well, if this is survival energy, like why is it so deeply physical? And again, trust me, I know this feeling because I came back from the silent meditation retreat. I genuinely felt like I had pins and needles just jumping through my spine, through my brainstem. I was having these jolts that went all the way down my chest. I was lying on the floor having these kind of fits, epileptic fit type things, crying, and I was like, no, this is deeply physical. This is different. And so I had lumbar puncture, I had MRI, blood tests, scans, epileptic fit test. Nothing came up. And of course, though, I know that this is deeply physical, and it very much is, because when your limbic system is activated like this, when it's trying to complete things, guess what? Your glial cells, your immune cells within your brain are likely to be activated, hence the stabbing pain there. You're obviously going to have less energy available. You're obviously going to be just feeling hyper aware, and you're going to be having these intense physical symptoms. So it does make complete physiological sense. It's nothing to do with your kind of like, going on in the background and in the back of your head. So anyway, this survival energy is trying to complete. It is trying to come up. And if you've seen any of my previous videos, I often talk about how gazelles and animals within the wild don't experience a kind of PTSD. Typically, they just demonstrate changes in behavior. And this is because they actively physically shake, this shaking and trembling mechanism when they stand up after an attack or seeing their loved ones be mauled. And this physically dispels this survival energy. Um, so this is something that humans, especially those who repress a lot, don't typically find themselves able to do. So we have this kind of unprocessed survival energy that it keeps trying to surface and keeps trying to come up. And every time we distract, every time we say stop, 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 and we do our little chart thing on the floor and do all of this kind of stuff, we are merely repressing and we are merely putting this back for another time. And so the only answer that has worked for me fully has been to feel into this and to fully notice and allow and accept when this response is coming up to complete and letting it complete. And it's not some magical thing that, oh, you suddenly complete it and you're going to be ready within like two weeks, you're going to be right as rain. It's deeply unpleasant. I'm not going to bullshit you. Like every time you do it and you notice it and you sit with it and you stay with it, it is horrendous. It's so unpleasant. You have this horrible brain fog, you have this stabbing in your chest, this deep fatigue in your legs, but you let it complete. And that teaches your brain and nervous system that it is safe to feel that. And it allows that mechanism to finally complete. And you might be having these weird feelings. You might have like little tremors or shakes. You might have like emotional outbursts. And again, this is a very physical and physiological mechanism that is taking place and executing, which is exactly what we want. Now, for me, and I know a lot of people will talk about, doing this acceptance and allowing work and helping to just sit with things, somatic tracking. Alan Gordon talks about this a lot when it comes to chronic pain. And I find that all very, very helpful and profoundly important. But for me personally, I needed a bit of extra assistance when it came to executing and helping that processing to take place. So things like EMDR was unbelievable because, again, a very physical therapeutic process to help you to execute that mechanism, somatic work, bilateral stimulation, all of these things put together and helping to fully complete and fully resolve this mechanism that has been unable to all those years before. So I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not going to bullshit you. Like, it's deeply, deeply unpleasant. It will take a long, long time. Every time you notice, every time you do this kind of work and you feel this sensation bubbling up, it's going to be shit. And it's going to be deeply, deeply unpleasant for a long time yet. You're not going to be better next week. You're not going to be better next month, probably. But little by little, you're going to notice that things start to unravel, things start to process. And as a message of hope, like a year ago, I generally just thought my life was over. After that meditation retreat, I couldn't feel my brain. It just felt like I was detached from reality. Everything was weird and off, and rumination, pain, crying fits. I really thought everything was over. And it's been a brutal 9, 10 months, and I still have difficult days. I still have fog at points. But when I look at where I am now, I've just got back from, weeks abroad, training, traveling, working, making videos. And yeah, it's beautiful on the other side. So yeah, no sugarcoating. It's going to be shit. It's going to be unpleasant. It's going to take a while, but on the other side, it is lovely. So take care and peace.